welcome to Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind. This is episode 184, and stocking up the jazz side of the mountain lair, I'm your co-host Russ.
And on the classical end, I am your co-host Mike.
Before we get going, I've got a few thanks to give out for last week's episode. First of all, thank you to Greek bassist Dinos Manos for sharing our episode on Facebook with all of the jazz friends and fans in Greece. You know, his post got like 60 likes almost instantly. They've got a really tight community over there.
I like Greece. We got to go there. We keep talking about it, you know, but if the situation opens up, I think we're there. We're relocating the mountain lair. A lot of mountains in Greece. We could live in a mountain there.
I'd love to make the show every week from Greece somewhere. That would be great.
That would be cool.
Anyway, be sure to check out Mr. Manos' recording North Wind on Puzzle Music. It's a really nice recording with a concept and great playing. And thanks to Origin Records for sharing our episode as well. We featured trumpeter David Weiss's new sextet recording, Auteur. And that's one you'll want to hear if you haven't heard it yet. So take a listen to that as well. Unfortunately, 2 weeks in a row, Mike, we're going to have some sad news, so I'm going to have to get over to the piano again this evening.
Hey, you're getting really good at playing that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Practice it all the time.
It's too bad, really, but...
First of all, we want to give a rest in peace to trumpeter-composer John McNeil, who passed away on September 27th at the age of 76. He was a fabulous American jazz trumpeter, but he kind of goes under the radar of the larger jazz fan base, but all musicians, I think, know about him. He performed over the years with artists such as Billy Hart, Rufus Reid, Horace Silver, Jerry Mulligan, and the Thad Jones Mal Lewis Orchestra. He was also well respected as an educator. He had more than 20 albums as a leader or co-leader. He also had a lot of health difficulties to overcome that gave him extra challenges in his trumpet playing. I remembered a recording of his, and I went back and checked it out last night. I was telling you about it. 1979 with Tom Harrell, Look to the Sky. And there's also got Kenny Barron on there.
Wow.
If you haven't heard his playing, check that out if you want to hear some genius trumpet playing between those two players.
I heard it myself. It was pretty great. I like Kenny Barron a lot, too, so on the piano, so yeah.
And also, just because we have an official jazz RIP to give out, we will give a mention to a big figure in American music. You've probably already heard. Kris Kristofferson passed away September 28th at the age of 88.
Yeah, no, a lot of people, I think of him as an actor, you know, because he's been in a lot of films.
Right.
Yeah, but he's a great songwriter as well, and was really a country musician and songwriter. Played with Willie Nelson a lot.
Right. He sort of was a pioneer of that outlaw country movement.
Right.
That got away from that squeaky clean Nashville image,
like
right?
Johnny Cash, you know, those guys. As
an actor, well, he was in one of my favorite cult films of all time, Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia.
Yeah.
With Warren Oates.
Oh, wow, so, Warren Oates.
Yeah. And, of course, he gave us the two big hits, Me and Bobby McGee, and Help Me Make It Through the Night. He got 4 Grammys and numerous other awards as well along the way. So rest in peace, Kris Kristofferson, a piece of American culture.
I think he also dated people like Janis Joplin and Barbra Streisand, who really seemed like two different kinds of people.
That's a pretty big spread there.
Yeah, I bet he had some stories to tell.
I bet.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to this week's content. In the episode description, you'll find links to Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon for all the music that we'll discuss. Also, at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist. That's all the music in one place on Deezer, CD quality streaming music from France. You can listen to the podcast as well on Deezer if you want to get everything in one place. Now, wherever you listen to us, if the full description or the links are not clear or easy to follow, you can always come over and check us out on our host site, Podbean, Podbean.com. Everything's easy to follow and very neat over there. If you enjoy the podcast, please follow or subscribe wherever you prefer to listen to us. Tell a music-loving friend, tell any musicians you know, help us grow our audience. If you take a moment to give us a ranking or write a short review, that really helps us out because it gets us listed in the music category recommendations, another way that we can find new listeners. Come on over and follow us on our Facebook page as well. You can get extra info and more new releases throughout the week. You can see our interaction with the artists and leave a message or comment there. And if you want to get in touch with us directly with any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. We'll be playing sample clips of the 6 recordings we're going to discuss in this episode, and this is our fair use disclaimer. Music sample clips are for commentary and educational purposes. We recommend that listeners listen to the complete recordings, all of which are available on streaming services in the links provided. And we also suggest that if you enjoy the music, you consider purchasing the CDs or high-quality downloads to support the artists. And we've got one we've been waiting for. First up in the classical section, Mike, I'm really excited about this one.
Yeah, this is Wranitzky's Orchestral Works Volume 7, and we've actually talked about all 7 volumes of these, not to mention a few others on other labels by other artists. But this is by our friends, the Czech Chamber Philharmonic Orchestra Pardubice, conducted by Marek Štilec. This is on the Naxos label, released September 27th. We've been doing this from the beginning, and I liked Wranitzky's music right from the beginning, but I wasn't so, sold on this series until like a few volumes in. And now this series seems to really be hitting its stride. We're getting some symphonies here, and the performances on this album are really great. Our friend Daniel Bernardson wrote the notes, of course, again, and that always makes this a bit of a treat as well. And I'll be quoting from the notes from time to time, so those are Daniel Bernardson's words, not mine.
Yeah, and if you haven't heard it, you can go way back to 2021 when this all started, and we interviewed Daniel and Marek.
Right, they were both on that, yeah.
Yeah, go check that interview out. It was one of our earlier ones. And you'll get some backstory on how all of this Wranitzky music has come to be recorded recently.
Yeah, and we actually met Daniel, too. He came to Japan and looked us up. And we went out. It was fun.
It was fun.
Yeah. I hope more people are going to do that. Maybe some of those Greek jazz musicians will make their way to Japan and drop us a line. We'll have to see.
We're ready and waiting.
We are. Okay. So let's talk about Volume 7. This might be the best in the series so far, I said. Tracks 1 through 4 are Symphony in D major, subtitled Con Musica Turca, from the 1790s. And when you see that title, Con Musica Turca, you know there are going to be triangles and cymbals and a certain rhythm.
Snare drums.
Yeah, drums as well, because it's sort of like the Janissary army marching. And you're familiar with this sound from Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. There's a Turkish march in there, in the middle of the fourth movement. And it's in a lot of operas as well. We'll hear that in the fourth movement. That reference has to do with the fourth movement. So Daniel tells us this work survives only in the music collection of Ferdinand III of Tuscany in Italy. So we're lucky to have it, I guess.
Yeah.
Anyway, track 1, Grave to Allegro Spiritoso. So that's slow to fast. So you have this kind of more brooding opening leading to a high-spirited release of tension in the main section. This particular symphony has an interesting opening featuring what sounds like it'll be a big gesture. But it winds up being a little bit of a trick. It's followed by a pause and a quieter phrase, thwarting expectations from the beginning. The Grave introduction goes through a few changes of texture before the giddy opening theme for the Allegro Spiritoso is heard. Let's hear that opening first. This sort of surprise, the big gesture followed by the thwarted expectation. It kind of sounds like there's some stubborn character like in there, like holding up the flow of the movement. Anyway, once we get to the Allegro Spiritoso, about a minute in, it really has a fantastic flow to it in Štilec's hands. It is very spiritoso. It's got a perfectly judged tempo, fast but not racing. Okay, I've been sort of complaining about this in some recent recordings. Štilec gets a really perfect tempo here. It sounds great. Let's hear a little bit of this. You hear that Mozart-like giddiness, which seems to have been in the air at the time. It's in a lot of the music of other composers as well. And the winds, sometimes you'll get these solos sections where only the winds play, and that's really a unique thing to Wranitzky we've come to learn. The music goes from light to thicker textures punctuated by timpani. So this is a thoroughly charming movement. The development section has the orchestra thinning out a bit to a more thread-like texture, with the same flowing texture pulling the listener through in high spirits. I also love the quality of the pianissimo passages. They've got an appealing thread-like quality to them in the strings. At 7 minutes and 27 seconds, there's a full stop, but not a tonic cadence, and the music continues to develop, rather surprisingly. So a little harmonic trick in there, too. We've been in this development for a long time, and I couldn't pinpoint the moment when the recapitulation began. In fact, it's not a straight recapitulation. Wranitzky has a way of sort of using the themes in sort of a new way at the end. It just doesn't repeat the beginning in the same key. There's some thematic sleight of hand, but the balance is restored in the 9th minute, and we head to the tonic, followed by an extension of the ending that I guess you could call a coda. The movement ends with high energy on the final chords. One of the reasons why it's important to listen to music by other composers, contemporaries of the really famous ones, is because we tend to think that music should go a certain way. And when you hear a lot of one composer, you hear the other composer, and you say, oh, he's not doing it right. But that's not really what's happening. He's just doing it his way. And audiences would have appreciated this at the time. We just don't hear it all. And I think that's to our detriment. Anyway, the second movement, Capriccio, marked largo. Here, Štilec goes for a vibrato-less light tone in the strings, sort of staccato, followed by one of Wranitzky's gorgeous wind passages, which I've come to think of as a compositional fingerprint of his. We don't really hear this sort of wind writing in any other composer from the era. Let's hear the opening of the second movement. Okay, and something new again once the wind section ends. This is a very inventive opening. And I really like the contrast, the staccato opening to the legato winds. Really beautiful. There's an elegance and a strangeness to the beginning all at the same time. At 1 minute and 25 seconds, the music departs from the opening theme with a bassoon playing the staccato bass line, which is interesting orchestration, and not what we think of as mainstream for the period. As the material heads for a cadence at the 3-minute mark, the music wraps around itself to get there. We then hear a theme played staccato as the beginning was played. It's a repeat of the material, but has a different sound here, though still let's make sure we can identify it by keeping his opening phrasing. Familiar material follows. This is the symphony's slow movement, but it's not really slow and song-like. It has a bit of energy to it. And the Capriccio title tells us it won't unfold in a predictable way. Capriccio kind of means like, as one likes, sort of like everything's like sort of a surprise. And that is in fact what we get. The piece ends on a quiet cadence, followed by an emphatic ending chord. The third movement is a minuet, allegretto, and then there's a trio. The minuet is shaped as expected with a heavy rhythm that was often used in symphonies at the time. It has an appealing piano middle section, light and graceful. Now, piano meaning soft, not like there's no piano in there. Light and graceful, providing contrast. It flows by well, and the rhythm keeps its dance quality. The trio section also starts piano, meaning softly, with the middle section being louder, and there are no timpani accents here. The phrasing is pretty square in 4 short phrases, and the melody is appealing. We don't get a straight repeat of the minuet at the end, but we do hear the theme. The fourth movement, finale, is marked rondo allegro. Wranitzky used this movement for several works linked to the imperial family, Bernhardsen tells us. So it must have been a favorite at court. The Turkish instruments, and this is the movement where the subtitle of the symphony comes from, the Turkish instruments of the title, they are triangles, cymbals, and a Turkish drum, enter in the third episode in Janissary style. The movement starts in a teasing style, and when it's repeated, timpani emphasize the theme. There's an impressive flute solo at the 54-second mark, breathy in tone, and I want to sample that because I thought this was really pretty. Yeah, really cheerful, uplifting.
Yeah.
Fantastic. The rondo theme is back at about the minute and 50-second mark. Then there's a military theme with a marching quality. This would be the first indication of the Turkish element. It's very appealing and rather subtly done. The flute comes in to accompany the rondo theme when it returns. There's now a snare drum and bass present in the next departure from the rondo theme. We hear the triangle here too. So here we hear where the symphony gets its name from, and let's sample this Turkish section. It's very lightly orchestrated. And there's the rondo theme again. All right, so that Turkish element is kept a little bit in the background, I thought, which is fine. It's certainly audible, and we notice that it's there. The piece ends triumphantly in high spirits, and it's a highly enjoyable listen. And really great conducting here and performing by the Czech Chamber Philharmonic Orchestra Pardubice. They really get a fantastic flow and really high spirits going in this symphony. Tracks 5 through 6, Merkur, Die Heiratsstifter, which means Mercury the Matchmaker. Now, in the classical era, there are a lot of operas, works that dealt with the Roman or Greek gods, and they would relate these to the royal people of the time. This particular work is a Singspiel, which means a sort of spoken, sung musical work for the theater. It was acted out. It wasn't quite an opera. The fairy tale plot revolves around the god Mercury, helping two love-struck couples overcome obstacles to marry. Oh, sounds like fun. Track 5, Prologue, Overture, moving to Allegro Presto. The prologue starts with a fanfare from a trumpet, and the strings come in with a theme also in high spirits and played with an intoxicating flow, just like the symphony we first heard. There's a brass instrument that gets a solo line in the second minute. I think it's a period French horn, could be a period trumpet. I'm not really sure, but let's hear it. The brass there is a surprising sound from a classical era symphony. Strings take over the next section and bring the piece to a close with some participation from the horn. Track 6, Act 1, Sinfonia, Allegro. So the Act 1 Sinfonia also begins in high spirits, as we would expect, given the theme of the piece. Themes are catchy and highly appealing, and the orchestra give the music an intoxicating happiness obtained via the tempo. A development section follows with some changes to keys in which the flowing material gets briefly harmonically stuck. It finds a way out, and we hear a repeat of the opening theme in the 3rd minute. The Sinfonia is given a grand ending. Tracks 7 through 10, Symphony in C Major, Opus 35, number 1, published around the year 1799. So this is the period where Beethoven is first becoming known, and Mozart is already dead for 8 years by this point. So this is the first of a set of 3 Symphonies à grande orchestre, Opus 35, and is an example of Wranitzky's mature orchestral style. This is Daniel writing this, Daniel Bernardson. Wranitzky augmented his orchestration with clarinets for the private concerts of Ferdinand III of Tuscany, and this is the version we hear on this recording. We get the clarinets. Fantastic. Track 7, Adagio moving to presto. Again, this is slow, winding up tension and then boom, releasing it. This starts with a grand repeated chord statement with quiet lines from the strings in between. The rhythm starts pulsing in quarter notes as the strings play themes. The main section explodes in at 1 minute and 17 seconds. And I want to sample the end of the introduction and the beginning of the presto so that you can kind of hear what this sounds like, even if you're not going to get the full effect, because you really need to hear it from the beginning for the tension to build, for the entire thing to really register. But let's hear it from around the 1 minute mark. All right, I got to get out of there at that point. Excellent conducting by Štilec here and playing by the orchestra. There's even a fantastic sudden piano that comes in, meaning like a softening from the forte in there that you heard. Really effective. And the pulse of this is very clear. The rhythm has a flowing sort of 6/8 feel to it, and it just glides. It sounds really great in this performance. Themes again are appealing throughout. At the 3 minute 19 second mark, the music comes in to a sudden halt and starts up again after a pause. The opening exposition section repeats here. Once we reach the pause again at 5 minutes and 28 seconds, the development section begins. It's just as lively as the exposition, with climbing figures heard often through the changing keys. At 6 minutes and 38 seconds, we hear another pause, and material from the exposition repeats. But again, this isn't a straight recapitulation. It's enough of one to make the sonata form familiar, for us to call this a sonata. Pauses figure often in this movement to change the music's harmonic and textural qualities. After a pause, we hear the second theme again, but here there's a sort of coda that brings us to the final cadence. Track 8, Allegretto con moto. The movement has a light, chirpy feel, sort of a light ballet feel to it, and this would count as the slow movement, but again, it's kind of lively. Let's hear the opening. Kind of has the feeling of the opening of a scene in an opera buffa. There's a middle section to the theme that's emphasized with timpani and repeating chords over them. A new section begins, shaped similarly to the opening theme. And here we get some of Wranitzky's signature wind writing. He won't blend the winds in with the rest of the orchestra. Well, he does at times, but he'll give them their own solo space very often. The opening theme repeats after this, then there's a new departure. We hear the theme one last time at the end, so this has surprisingly been a rondo movement. There's a coda featuring new orchestrations of the material, including a brief segment for low winds. The movement ends cheerfully. Track 9, Menuetto un poco allegretto, and Trio. This symphony is in high spirits throughout, and here we have a flowing minuet, not quite so square and steady as the one we heard in the first symphony on this album. After 1 minute and 9 seconds, there's a brief section for winds after a pause. The winds figure heavily in this movement, particularly in the trio section, where they take the lead entirely, so I'm going to sample that. It's got this lovely bouncing sort of 6/8 quality to it, those threes. The winds make the equally high-spirited trio stand out. Wranitzky repeats the opening minuet at the end. He gave the trio a tremendous amount of room in this movement, though. At track 10, the finale, marked Presto, a light, high-spirited string theme begins the movement. Let's hear that. Yeah, really high spirits again.
Yeah.
So this is a rondo, and the intervening sections are also high-spirited. Winds again figure in the departures from the rondo theme, but here they alternate with the strings and sometimes combine with them. We hear the rondo theme 3 times in the movement before it reaches its conclusion. Again, throughout the piece, Štilec conducts with beautifully judged tempos and a flowing, high-spirited style. Track 11, Die Rache, or The Revenge. Act 1, Introduction, and Act 2, Sinfonia, 1795, Andante con moto, moving to Allegro. Now, I got to explain this a little bit. Die Rache was a German-language adaptation of The Revenge by Edward Young, who lived 1683 to 1765. The play revolves around Zanga, an enslaved Moorish prince, driven by a thirst for vengeance against Don Alonso, his master and captor, responsible for the murder of Zanga's father. Wranitzky provided overtures for each act, and the bulk of them formed the symphony in D minor La Tempesta, which you can hear on Volume 2 of this series of Wranitzky works. These are the 2 pieces not included in that symphony. They're combined here, as Daniel Bernardson says, to create a highly satisfying unity. So we're hearing them both as part of the same piece. And really, the way this works is it goes from that slow to fast again. And it works very well because it's a structure that we understand and hear quite a bit in this era. So the movement or the piece starts slowly, sounding like it should be coming after a sonata movement in a symphony. It certainly could have been chosen for one had Wranitzky found another home for it. It's a lovely, lilting melody with grace and a bit of a teardrop to it, the first we've heard on the album. Yeah, this has been a very high-spirited album. And here in the last track, we're finally getting a little bit of a little teardrop, a little sadness in there. Štilec paces this so that the grace of the theme comes through. At 1 minute and 59 seconds, there's a fanfare, then the Allegro starts, and we're in full sunshine again. Let's just get one more burst of sunshine before we leave this album. New theme. The two sections played together make the piece sound a bit like the Andante is an introduction to the Allegro, and there's light filigree string work in the piece, the orchestra producing an appealing sound. There's a bit of brass in the section that follows as the strings continue their filigree work. The work eagerly progresses and once again ends in high spirits. Not what you'd expect from music for a play called The Revenge, but there you have it. Maybe the revenge has been completed and everybody's happy, who knows. Anyway, this is an album with very little harmonic darkness. All works are in major keys and come across with absolute optimism. It's an album full of orchestral sunshine from the classical era, so much that I think I got a suntan just by listening to it. Both symphonies are in major keys, and the majority of the material written for the theater is also in major. Marek Štilec is in fine form throughout the album, perhaps the best form he's been in the series so far. The music all flows appealingly, and accents are taken so that they enhance the material. Tempos are ideal throughout. I'd say this is an ideal album to start with if you haven't heard Wranitzky's music. There's what we've become familiar with calling a Mozartian feel to it, but Wranitzky has some formal quirks as well as a way with wind instruments that are all his own. Put this on to brighten your day. You'll feel uplifted instantly.
I was really looking forward to this release, especially because I wanted to hear more Wranitzky symphonies. We've heard some other types of works, but the symphonies are what always get me pumping. And this satisfied with both the program and the performance. The symphony in D major, Con Musica Turca, was fun from the beginning with that stop and start feel that created a lot of anticipation. A little bit further in, about a minute and a half, there are these huge burbles of sound that are really interesting, and the sprightly woodwind arranging that I've come to expect from Wranitzky. That first movement is full of ideas that just keep coming at 11 minutes long, and the performance is enthusiastic. I like the snare drum in the finale and the fun triplet lines as well. And the Mercure has those great brass fanfares. Checking the scores, which Daniel sent us, it's actually a post horn.
Ah, post horn.
How cool is that?
No wonder why I couldn't identify it.
So thanks for sending those, Daniel. And they're available to everyone. Just go to the Wranitzky Project website, which is wranitzky.com. You can find the scores for all of these great works if you want to check them out, or hopefully more groups will perform them. I also liked the fake-out cadences in the Sinfonia that we've come to expect from Wranitzky's style. And the C major symphony was enjoyable too. I noted the calliope-like woodwind pumping in the third movement. That was really fun. And I'm ready for more symphonies already, so bring on the next Wranitzky release.
Actually, Daniel had said that the next one, Volume 8, is going to come out pretty soon, so we're not going to have to wait too long.
Yeah.
Apparently.
Looking forward to that.
All right, onwards to an album called Virtuosi, or Virtuosi. This is by two brothers, Romain Leleu on trumpet and Thomas Leleu on tuba. I'm not sure if he would say that as Thomas or Thomas. They're both French, and this is on the La Dolce Volta label, released on September 20th. The booklet note is in the form of an interview in which they talk about the works on the album. First, on this very varied album that really goes from the Baroque up till our current times. It's
Eric Clapton, right?
Yeah, it covers a lot. You gave away the big surprise there at the end. I really wasn't expecting that, but let me talk about that when we get there. Let's just start from the beginning here. We start with Johann Sebastian Bach on track 1, Overture for Orchestra number 3 in D major, BWV 1068, The Air. This is a very famous piece, and this is arranged by the brothers Romain and Thomas Leleu. Let's hear it. You all know this piece, so let's hear what this sounds like on a trumpet and tuba. So what do you think, listeners? Are you as taken by this as I was?
How about that vibrato, too?
Yeah, the whole sound of this just really knocked me out. Wow, I was pretty mesmerized right from the first notes. There's something almost electronic sounding, like a synthesizer, to the tuba's stately pulsing line as the trumpet mellowly plays the famous melody. I thought this was pretty remarkable. The tuba's attack has a light percussive quality to it, that little burst of air that tubas are able to achieve. The overall sound of the recording is on the dry side, very close and detailed. The work is taken at a stately pace and works remarkably well, as you heard. Track 2, Thierry Esqueix, born in 1965, same year I was born. Homage à Piazzolla. There's a lot of Astor Piazzolla on this album. We leap from the Baroque to the contemporary, and the rhythm is livelier here, and the trumpet is fanfarish in its opening line. The tuba has a lightly syncopated repeating note, and of course there's a light tango quality to the piece. I'm going to start this sample, about a minute in, when it really gets going. I like the two-line note-against-note quality of the piece in the second minute, and I should mention ensemble is excellent between these two brothers. They achieve balance naturally. The tuba shows a lot of agility in parts. Listen from the 4-minute mark on for an example of rapid attack on the tuba. I'm going to sample something of that later in the program. Track 3, Astor Piazzolla, Histoire du Tango, Bordel, 1900. This is the first movement of the Histoire du Tango, which we've heard, I think, twice before on this podcast. This arrangement is by Manuel Dutrian. The trumpet starts this with a fanfare, and there's a drum-like tapping on a surface, something like sticks against a table. Line against line comes in again, and I love the full-on tango rhythm the tuba briefly sets. Let's hear this from about 30 seconds in. I like the way the piece sort of suggests the tango rhythm without outlining it throughout the work. Good arranging here. The piece comes across with a fun feel to it in this arrangement. I don't remember it sounding like that in its original guise. It was a little more kind of heavy, I think. It's normally a piece with a bit of that tango heaviness to it, but not here. It's very entertaining. I'm also enjoying the trumpet's glossy yet sensitive tone in slower passages. The opening of the work repeats in the last 2 minutes of the track. Track 4, going into the Romantic era, Reinhold Glier, 6 pieces, Opus 39, Berceuse, arranged by, again, Manuel Dutrian. The tuba begins the rocking bass line. I should mention a berceuse is a lullaby. And the tuba begins the rocking bass line as the trumpet comes with a muted, gauzier tone for the melody. Romain Leleu says he achieved this sound with a mute and a piece of cloth over the bell of the instrument. Let's hear that sound. and very pretty. But I am wondering if this would actually put a baby to sleep in this arrangement. So if there are any brass players out there that want to do an experiment, play this arrangement for your child, your infant, and let me know what happens. I'm very curious. It's a very pretty piece, perhaps with more volume than you'd expect for a lullaby, though it is played with a gentler sound. Track 5, Louise Bonfa, Magna de Carnaval, arranged by Manuel Dutroyan. The trumpet starts this work with a mute in the bell of the instrument. He sounds a bit like Miles Davis here, though recorded much more closely. The tuba's bass comes out with a percussive push of air. I'm going to sample this from around 1 minute and 40 seconds in. Yeah, I hate to fade out on the tuba's melody there because it's pretty remarkable that a tuba can play that melodically and really have the melody come across. A lot of surprises for me, especially in the tuba playing on this album. At 2 minutes and 17 seconds, the tuba gets the spotlight briefly. We heard the beginning of that. Playing a solo for a few bars, then going back to the slow bass line. This sounds a bit sad for a carnival morning in Brazil. Maybe it's the hangover from the night before that's being expressed here. Couldn't tell you. Anyway, it's a really pretty piece. Track 6, Thomas Leleu. This is the tuba player. Improvisation number 3. His improvisation acts as an intro to the upcoming Piazzolla work. It shows some very impressive virtuosity due to the agility and clarity of tone with that agility. It's also got a groovy feel to it and some cool low tones in the last 30 seconds. And by the way, listener, by now, we're only 6 tracks in. You might have noticed the incredible amount of variety that we've already heard on this album. And it all works. It's really fantastic. I was just enjoying this all the way through. Track 7, Astor Piazzolla, Tango Etude number 3, Molto Marcato e Energico. The tuba emphatically starts the tango bass line. This is a solo work for the tuba, and it provides him with some impressive virtuosic moments. Let's hear one of those. This is what I was promising at the beginning when I didn't sample his virtuosity at the beginning. We're going to hear it now. So this is about a minute in. You forget about the wow. breath, but I don't think I could even push the valve buttons down that fast. It's pretty amazing. Impressive performance all the way through, by the way. Track 8, Pablo Casals, El Cant des Ocels, or the Song of the Birds, really, arranged by Romain and Thomas Leleu. The tuba starts this work, too, and again impresses with trills. The trumpet comes in with a rather mournful melody over a droning tuba note, which eventually changes to underline the harmony. I'll play a little bit of this. This is from about a minute into the piece. piece remains mournful throughout. These are rather sad birds singing. Track 9, Johann Sebastian Bach, Invention for Two Voices No. 1, in C major, BWV 772. This is the famous first keyboard invention that all piano students learn, and it comes out here with sparkling legato lines and satisfying ensemble. Let's hear this very familiar work. I always like hearing these works with different timbres on the voices. It kind of makes them stand out a bit more. Yeah. Track 10, Johann Sebastian Bach again, Invention for Two Voices No. 3, in D major. This one's a much harder one to play, and all piano students don't play this one, although you're supposed to really play them all as you're progressing. This is BWV 774. This comes across even more impressively with its faster-moving lines and trills. Each voice is given moments with the melody while the other plays a less complex counter melody. Let's hear a rather prolonged sample of this. This is pretty amazing. I was pretty amazed by that tuba trill that you have to listen in there. Pretty amazing. Track 11, we hear Reinhold Glier again from his 8 pieces Opus 39, Gavotte, arranged by Manuel Dutrelant. This has a rather high-stepping cheerfulness to it. It has a more pastoral middle section with droning tuba, impressively played at a soft dynamic. The tuba then gets the melody as the trumpet drones. The opening theme repeats. Track 12, François Couperin, Le Barricade Mystérieuse, very famous keyboard piece, mostly for harpsichord, arranged here by Manuel Dutrelant. This sounds really odd in this arrangement, I have to say. On the harpsichord, it sounds continuous, and the kind of one timbre that the harpsichord gets makes it sound like this is one big sort of continuing line. But the differing timbres between the two instruments isolate the bass from the trumpet melody, and it kind of changes the character of the piece. Let's listen to this for a bit. This actually comes across with a bit of cheerfulness, while the harpsichord version is stately yet playful. The actual keyboard version, when you hear it on the harpsichord, kind of comes across mysteriously. Track 13, Johann Halvorsen, Passacaglia after Handel's Harpsichord Suite No. 7 in G minor, HWV 432, arranged by Manuel Dutrelant. The tuba plays longer bass notes here, not just punctuating the harmony as the trumpet plays the theme with an attractive legato feel. Themes start being handed off, and of course the tuba shows some beautiful legato playing when he has the theme. This is a passacaglia, but to tell the truth, it behaves more like a straight theme and variations, with the character of the themes changing after each pause. The tuba is especially impressive in his runs. I don't want to take anything away from the beautiful tone and phrasing, not to mention virtuosity, of trumpeter Romain Leleu, but you generally don't hear the tuba playing with the speed and fluidity that Thomas Leleu demonstrates on this album. Listen to this. How about that? Man.
Yeah.
There's an attractively played mournful variation in the 3rd minute, followed by a more lively one, and the contrasts in this piece come out strongly in this arrangement. The entire composition ends with an accelerando, circus-like theme, very exciting, but it retreats into nobility for the final cadence. Track 14, Alan Baczynski. This guy lived 1940 to 2020. Interlude number 4, arranged by Manuel Dutrelont. I've pronounced this guy's name like 4 different ways so far. Choose the one that's right, please. The trumpet has a mute in the bell here. This has a jazzy feel to it and is played in staccato phrases. Even the tuba manages some jazz inflections when he plays a melody. Check this out. Even the tuba swings in that sample.
Yeah.
The trumpet starts playing a brash, jazzy theme about the 50-second mark, with the tuba providing walking bass. The trumpet lets off some cool but relatively tame wails in the high end, never losing the smooth timbre, and he gets a good swing feel for his 8th notes. Not always the case with classical musicians. Thomas Leleu on tuba also brings the swing in his solo at around 2 minutes and 30 seconds, but with not quite the same feel as Romain on the trumpet. Still, I found his playing impressive, and this is a fun piece. Okay, this is the piece we were talking about earlier when Russ mentioned Eric Clapton. Christoph Moschberger, born in 1985. Man, his last name actually sounds like a Japanese fast food joint. You know which one I'm talking about. Yes. Anyway, this is called Tears for Pachelbel. Okay. Now, this starts out with some drawn-out, mopey, boing tuba notes as the trumpet plays the Pachelbel canon theme. This is very famous. Everybody knows this. And then, at about the 40-second mark, Eric Clapton's song Tears in Heaven comes in. Tears for Pachelbel combines the Pachelbel canon with Eric Clapton's song Tears from Heaven. Let's hear the entry of Tears from Heaven. I spilled my drink when I heard this in the cafe with my headphones on, just so you know. The switch comes as quite a surprise, although I didn't really give you that because I didn't play any of the Pachelbel canon here. The trumpet takes that theme for most of the track while the tuba continues more or less with the Pachelbel canon bass line, which really is a Passacaglia bass line. It's just in canon above it. At 3 minutes and 22 seconds, the tuba plays the melody in harmony with the trumpet for a moment. It's a fun composition, excellently performed here, with all of the humor and requisite timing required. Track 16, Thomas Leleu again, Beaulieu, arranged by Laurent Elbaz. The title refers to a place by the sea that Thomas doesn't reveal. Both brothers play on this track. The tuba has a wave-like arpeggiated bass line suggesting the sea as the trumpet plays a romantic melody. It's an attractive work. And then the final track, 17, is an Irish traditional track, Down by the Sally Gardens. This is a song that a lot of singers learn, and the tuba has the melody, which serves as an introduction to the trumpet's entry with the full famous theme. And that's the end of a magnificent program and performance. This is an album that brass players absolutely must hear, and that others will find entertaining as well. The overall sound that the Leleu brothers produce brings a smile. It sounds like these two really enjoy playing with each other. The program itself is pretty light, featuring no works over 7 minutes, and both brothers have exceptionally beautiful tone. I singled out the tuba of Thomas Leleu for his unexpectedly virtuosic moments on this recording. It's a record that'll please anyone and will really bring a smile to your face, along with the Wranitzky. So we've got two sunny albums here.
Yeah, there are some technically challenging pieces here, but mostly it's musicality that's on display. Getting trumpet to blend with tuba without a middle brass instrument is kind of a challenge, but Romain easily achieves it. The vibrato on the opening Bach assured me that things were going to be interesting, and I wasn't let down. The program is varied and entertaining. I enjoyed the Piazzolla a lot. Great, accurate, and assured tuba lines throughout. Tears for Pacchiaba was fun, as you said, and so was the swinging Baczynski piece. About the sound of the recording, it reminds me a lot of the practice room where I used to play in a brass quartet or quintet. And I wouldn't have liked that sound if this were a strings recording, but it reminded me of playing in tight quarters with brass and in those kind of rehearsal spaces. And I felt like I was in the room with them on this recording, and everything was well balanced and clearly audible with a little dry sound, but I found it charming.
Yeah, it really is very close. It's sort of like you're sitting like with them, and brass is very loud. Anyway, it's a full-sounding recording that way. All right, our contemporary composer tonight in Album 3, Sofia Gubaidulina, a composer that I really like. This is her triple concerto for violin, cello, and Bayan, and a work called Rejoice, sonata for violin and cello. The artists are Baiba Skride on violin, Harriet Krijgh on cello, I'm guessing that's the pronunciation, Elsbeth Moser on Bayan, and NDR Radiophilharmonie, conducted by Andrew Manze. He's a famous violinist himself back in the day. He's become a conductor in, the last 10 or 20 years now. This is on the Orpheo label, released on September 6th. And Gubaidulina, I'm very happy to call her a contemporary composer. She's now 92 years old, and her 93rd birthday is on October 24th, so coming up. She started her professional composing career in 1963 in the Soviet Union, and despite reprisals from the government and performance bans, unwaveringly continued down her compositional path without submitting to the doctrine of socialist realism. And that always amazes me. I don't know how some people got away with this. A lot of people didn't. She got her international breakthrough in 1981 with the violin concerto Offertorium, which she had written for Gidon Kremer. She has been living in Germany since 1991, and she considers Johann Sebastian Bach and Anton Webern as her most important models. And again, those are two composers that you would think are very different from each other. Anyway, the bigger work here, let's say, is the triple concerto for violin, cello, and Bayan, composed in 2017. Now, a Bayan is a button accordion. It's a Russian folk music instrument. Gubaidulina has used the instrument in a number of her compositions. This work was based on Beethoven's triple concerto, which was for violin, cello, and piano, only with a Bayan instead of a piano. She quickly made it clear that she was not emulating Beethoven's model, and I think that'll become obvious when you hear the samples. This is a live performance of the German premiere on 18 April 2018. Threes appear often in the work, not just in the number of soloists, but also in the three-part form and the frequent use of triads and parallel third lines. The work involves expansion from the clusters heard at the beginning to the expanding intervals at the end. And actually, you can follow this pretty easily if you listen to the entire work. She makes this pretty clear, this structure. The introduction ends with a cadenza, which introduces a sighing motif, which is taken up by the orchestra. Another solo cadenza, interrupted repeatedly by string tremolos, marks the beginning of the second part of the composition, and a third cadenza separates the second and third parts of the work. It's going to be important to remember that, because this is all on one track, this entire 30-minute piece. It would have been nice to have 5 different tracks to separate the cadenzas and the 3 sections of this continuous movement. But instead, we're in the concert hall having to follow. I feel like when you're in your house, it's a different experience than listening in a concert hall. I mean, you'll just listen to the music there. But in your house, it's nicer to have a little guidance, I think. Anyway, this work starts with a crescendoing, droning note. Gubaidulina always has intriguing timbres in her compositions, and here we hear some low, droning instruments alternating, including the Bayan and what sounds like a tuba. The cello plays a rising arpeggiated figure. The violin comes in on a sustained note as the cello keeps playing its rising arpeggio. The violin also has a rising arpeggiated figure, played at about half the speed as the cello's line. I love the high woodwinds at around the 2-minute and 45-second mark, creating an icy atmosphere high up in the orchestra. The Bayan is heard clearly at 3 minutes and 30 seconds, along with the other solo instruments in the cadenza in the 3rd minute, marking the end of the introduction. I'd like to hear this first cadenza so that we can get an ear for the 3 solo instruments. This is from around the 3-minute and 30-second mark. It's got a folksy sound to it, the Bayan does. A march figure comes out of the drums at the 4-minute and 30-second mark, and this is the first section. Before this was the introduction and then the cadenza. Let's sample it and get a sense of its character. This is at about the 5-minute mark. It's pretty easy to remember those sort of glissandoing up and down lines, making sort of an arch. This section is marked by patterns of 3 and by unusual timbres. There's a lot of space, and there's an interesting interrupted effect in the Bayan, where it sounds like it's suddenly being shut off as it crescendos, creating a kind of hiccup in its tone. A lot of this section is very quiet. In the 9th minute, we hear the Bayan alternating with string tremolos for the second cadenza. This features the Bayan playing a single chord, crescendoing. The second section begins at 9 minutes and 58 seconds, with the violin and cello playing melodic themes and the orchestra providing chord patterns between the soloists' statements. I'm going to sample this from around the 10-minute and 45-second mark. The Bayan is mostly used for effect in this section, playing chord clusters and making some intriguingly odd sounds in the low end. At 14 minutes and 14 seconds, the orchestra slowly moves its material upward, with the soloists wildly bowing. This upward movement ends with the Bayan coming in at 14 minutes and 57 seconds, playing chords as a brass melody is played. Let's hear that. I like the writing for the brass in this section, which is, like so much else in this work, a bit out of the ordinary and appealing for that reason. This symphonic rising line then starts slowly descending, reaching its lowest rung at 17 minutes and 58 seconds when the cello comes in for a dug-in solo section. The violin then takes over with a complex double-stopped line. I also like the blending of the soloists. Lines will be handed off with little timbral difference, so the listener can't quite tell at times which instrument is playing. The violin and Bayan get involved in a duet in minute 19. There's a drum roll on the snare and bass drum. Then at 20 minutes and 30 seconds, we get a sudden loud rushing figure that starts off section 3, the last section. Let's hear that. The Bayan then introduces low strings and brass. There's a really impressive climbing French horn line at the end of the 22nd minute. The structure is formed by its repeating figures, constant upward triads, the Bayan's chord crescendos, things like that. At 25 minutes and 10 seconds, we're hearing similar chord arpeggio figures from the cello as the violin plays a rising line and the low brass shake the room with their deep tones. Oh, we have to hear that. Material from the opening repeats from this point. We hear the very high bird-like winds, followed by a violin solo, which is hands off to the cello as the soloist line drops into the low end. At 27 minutes and 39 seconds, the cello plays a low note while the violin plays a very high one. Contrasts follow, Bayan clusters and low brass drones. Rising figures with march rhythm in the drums emerge in the 28th minute. The piece ends on an emphatic chord, and then there's a minute of applause on the recording, reminding you this was a live performance. It's easy to forget when listening. The audience is very quiet, and the music is so intense that you're really sort of drawn into it. It's a very impressive, characterful performance of a difficult work. Now, if you're listening to these samples and you're wondering, this all sounds very different, how does it all hold together? Well, you really have to hear it from the beginning to the end. There's a wealth of ideas in this piece, and Gubaidulina is really a very individual composer, very unique. I would suggest, if you sort of liked anything about what you heard, to really explore her music. Okay, tracks 2 through 6 are the other work on the album, called Freue dich, or Rejoice, Sonata for Violin and Cello. This was written in 1981. It was written when Gubaidulina was in Moscow. She was asked to write a piece for violin and cello by the musician couple Oleg Krijgh and Natalia Gutman. Now, people probably know Oleg Kajgan's name, and probably Natalia Gutman's too, if you were around in that era. They were both very famous. And when looking for ideas for this piece, she came across the writings of the itinerant philosopher Grigory Skovoroda from 1722 to 1794, while visiting her sister in Ukraine. Skovoroda considered poverty and self-examination to be essential prerequisites for finding God. Oh, this is very Russian sounding, isn't it? For the 5 movements of the work, Gubaidulina chose various quotations from Skovoroda about the joy that relates to God and tried to express such moments of joy by musical means. In this piece, the normal tone represents earthly reality, and the string harmonic is the entry into a transcendent, or as Gubaidulina puts it, transfigured reality. I find this idea intriguing, and was really eager to hear this piece. The string harmonic represents the inner joy that one feels when one finds God. The 5-movement form reflects the form of a Latin Mass. The duo felt unable to premiere the work in 1981 for personal and political reasons. This was still the Soviet Union after all, because the religious references were unmistakable. And of course, when you have a communist society like the Soviet Union, they're atheist. The government is the top authority. They eventually premiered the work in 1988 at the Kumo Chamber Music Festival in Finland. So track 2, the first movement, is called Your Joy No One Will Take Away From You. Now, actually, all of the titles are in German. I'm just going to read the English translation of the title. So this starts with a bright-sounding violin, sounding a tone, then playing a high harmonic, so we're already in the transcendent right away. The physical and spiritual worlds are both present from the beginning. Let's get a sample of that. And I find this really intriguing because hearing it, the message is God is always present. So right from the beginning, as the violin is sounding in the physical, we're hearing that spiritual echo in the high end. The natural tone and the harmonic alternate via short 2-note patterns, often followed by a single harmonic note played up high, as the notes say, like a flageolet, which is a high flute, something like a tin whistle. The work itself is pretty static rhythmically. It doesn't really move toward or away from anything. It's just those patterns that count. After about 2 minutes and 15 seconds, the cello finally comes in as the violin plays an ear-piercing high harmonic note. The cello engages in the same type of material, bowed note, then harmonic, which he arrives at via a glissando. The track ends with the cello sliding up to a high harmonic. Track 3 is the second movement, Rejoice with Joy. This has a sort of buzzing, circling low pattern on both instruments. There's a lot of trickery with the bows here. The players rapidly bounce them off the string for effect on occasion. Let's hear a little bit of this. The piece, unlike the first movement, is constantly moving, though not in a particular direction. The material circles itself throughout. Track 4, movement 3, Rejoice, Rabbi. Here the cello starts up high and plays an impassioned, almost chanted figure. It sounds vocal in approach. Then there's the harmonic answer at times. The piece features low, buzzing double stops and sul ponticello bowing. The violin comes in and reaches a harmonic. It plays double stops, sometimes with full voice tone and harmonic at the same time. Gubaidulina keeps the timbral changes coming, so you don't know what the next sound you'll hear is. In the third minute, the attack in the cello changes to pizzicato. It sort of sounds like a giant guitar the way it's plucked. Droning, bending figures follow briefly, then the violin plays brief phrases and changes character after each one. A rising figure appears in the violin and cello in the 5th minute and continues for some time. The material is so varied that I'm having a hard time picking something to sample. There's nothing that I can call representative of the movement, except for the slowish tempo, which is in complete contrast to the previous movement. The rising motif seems important, as it takes the entire second half of the movement, so let's sample this from about the 8-minute and 30-second mark. You notice that constantly rising cello line and then the anxiety of the violin playing those really quick patterns, but we're not hearing any harmonics, so we're trying to get up higher and higher, but we're not there. We're not breaking through. Spiritual breakthrough to the harmonic sound is reached around the 9-minute and 45-second marks, so in this movement it took an effort. Both instruments then played drawn-out double-stopped chords at the end, powerfully projected via the bows, and the movement finally ends on a trilling figure. Track 5, the fourth movement, and he returned to his own abode. This starts with harmonics on both instruments drawn out by the bow. The entire movement features harmonics with occasional sounds in the normal bowing style. It sounds like the violin is simply playing high up in its range without harmonics for a good period of time, as it sounds more expressive. Let's hear this from about the 2-minute mark. So we're hearing the earthly and the transcendent at the same time when we hear that. So I guess it's just living with the awareness of the divine. This sample is a good example of the sound and tempo of the movement. The violin line slowly descends as the movement goes on, with the cello constantly in the heavenly realm with her harmonics. The cello eventually comes down into the full sounding range in about the 4th minute, and right at the end of the 5th minute, pizzicati appear among wavering tones from both instruments, played via slow slides that give a moaning sound. The piece ends with these sounds, and the piece's form is a slow descending pattern on both instruments. I rather enjoyed the sound of this entire movement. Track 6 is the 5th and final movement. Now, in English, it's referred to as Heed Thyself, but the German title is Hör auf deine innere Stimme, which is more like Listen to Your Inner Voice, and I rather like that title better, so I'm going to go with that. This actually starts with a bit of a dancey rhythm. Then the violin starts doing these quick ripped-out half scales played often by bouncing the bow on the strings. Let's hear the opening. It sounds rather happy, and sort of brings to mind the first movement of Messiaen's quartet for the end of time. The violin goes off on those quick rising patterns as the cello plays long bowed tones underneath. The violin's energy here is irrepressible, while the cello meditates. We're completely out of the harmonic effects in this movement. The cello gets a solo section, playing low down just before the 3-minute mark, then soaring up via a glissando to the harmonic note, the first in the movement. The movement eventually ends in the harmonic realm, as this piece really should. Alright, I'm biased because this composer has interested me since I first heard the Kronos Quartet perform a work of hers in, I think it was the 1980s or the early 1990s. The music is certainly approachable, but it's got some sonic challenges. The triple concerto is easy to follow with its introduction and 3 sections all separated by cadenza-like sections, and the recording is amazingly clear with a silent background, remarkable since it was a live recording. Though I do wish that tracks could have been divided to clearly indicate when each section started. The audience must have been rapt. I particularly enjoyed the writing for orchestra with its powerful use of low brass for a lot of the work. The meaning of the work lies not only in the timbre but in the musical gestures made by the soloists and orchestra. This is also true in the duo Rejoice. The idea of the spiritual being portrayed by harmonics is one that I took to, and once you have an intellectual understanding of what's happening, you just need to listen as musical events unfold. Gubaidulina's ideas are unique in classical music. I'd like to encourage listeners to make the effort to listen with an understanding of what the composer is communicating. I find that it's very rewarding on the deepest level.
I found the triple concerto to be pretty interesting. It was really dark and ominous right from the start, and it takes a while for things to get going, so it really builds a sense of anticipation. It's a really interesting timbral landscape. There's all kinds of interesting sonic things going on, especially in the low end. And I liked how the three instruments kind of peek out from that scenery before we hear any larger exposition. You sort of just see them coming out from all these other really dark and heavy kind of sounds. And I really enjoyed the brass parts near the end. I have to admit, though, that despite reading the notes and hearing your spiritual explanation, Rejoice was much harder for me to appreciate.
Really? I'm surprised. All right.
I like the idea of reaching for the harmonics, but I don't know, maybe I'll have to listen to it again and give it another chance. But I was kind of ready for it to be over when it got to that final climactic reaching ending. So,
well, there you go. I felt entirely differently about that. I really liked it.
What can I say? Just being honest.
Yeah, well, that's what we're all about.
I did like the orchestral work, though. All right, over on to the jazz half of the program. Got a lot of variety this evening. We're going to start out with a piano trio recording by pianist Bryn Roberts. It's called Aloft. It's on Elastic Recordings. Came out on September 27th. Canadian-born Bryn Roberts studied at McGill University. Now he's based in Portland, Oregon, but he spends a lot of time in New York, where he used to live. After a long career as a sideman in the jazz world, playing with artists like Seamus Blake, Will Vinson, Alan Ferber, and also as a collaborator with several singer-songwriters, Rosanne Cash, Sean Colvin, and Dar Williams. He's made 5 releases as a leader with quintets, quartets, and most recently in a duo format with guitarist Lage Lund. But this is his debut in trio format. And interestingly about this recording, Aloft, it was recorded in Brooklyn, where Roberts lived for 15 years. This trio rehearsed only once, and they played a gig at Mesro that night of the rehearsal, and then they recorded this album the following day. So keep that in mind as you listen to it. Bryn Roberts on piano, Matt Penman on bass, and Quincy Davis on drums. As I said, recorded in Brooklyn at Big Orange Sheep, October 28th, 2022. Goes back a ways, although it's just been released. Engineered and mastered by Michael Perez Cisneros. Mixed by Gus Berry. Produced by Bryn Roberts. The recording is going to get underway with an original by Roberts, Let's Agree That You Agree With Me. Roberts starts it out solo with 8 measures of the chord pattern that will become the A section here and gets us familiar with it. Penham and Davis join in for another round, and then Roberts puts the melody on top and then gives it a contrasting B section, and then the 2 sections repeat. I like Davis's clean subdivided cymbals and tom touches. We can get all that in a minute sample at the beginning, so let's hear the recording get started. Things develop from there. With trio tightness on the syncopated rhythms, we hear the opening pattern as an intro into Robert's solo. His improvisations are snappy with interesting intervals in his lines, so let's check out some of his ideas. bass solo on this tune as well, with a lot of bounce in his melodic lines. And when Roberts returns with the familiar chords, he still has a lot of fresh ideas that continue to the end. Track 2, another Roberts original, Steen's Scene. This is a neat tune and arrangement. It's basically a minor blues with some interesting harmonies. They're going to go around the pattern repeatedly, which moves in blocks of chords. It gets softer as they repeat so that Davis can do some tasty brush decoration on the drums. I'm going to pick up the sample about a minute in so that you can hear that. There's a break there into an improvised solo from Roberts. I'm going to sample the ending of his solo so that you can check out his two-hand interaction and interesting chord voicings. And Penman gets a solo next that works up into the upper register with clear articulation on the bass. Roberts and Davis trade fours for a few rounds after that, before a couple final rounds of the blues melody. Track 3 is another Roberts original, Aloft, the title track. A solo piano start, it's ringing, and you can feel the waltz meter. Penman joins in, and then Davis with subtle brushes. Let's hear it get going. Cymbal roll there, the main melody gets started. It's 32 measures and then has another 8 measure kind of final dreamy section that sets up Penman for a bass solo. Let's hear his playing on this tune. nicely melodic and pleading. Robert's solo has some ringing but smooth upper register lines that are really magical, and the ending of the tune has an unwinding effect that is kind of charming. Track 4, Kurt Weill's My Ship, from the 1941 stage musical Lady in the Dark. A relaxed tempo with a loping walking bass from Penman. Robert's chords and phrasing are stylish here. Let's check out the first section of the melody. Roberts has some delicate high register ideas in his solo with very fine articulation that I'd like you to hear. Has a solo too, and Roberts picks it up from the melody B section again. This tune has an extended final A section anyway, but the ending here really caught my attention for the lush harmonic ideas from Roberts, and I'd like you to check out that as well. Very classy stuff. Track 5, we're back to a Roberts original, Stevedore Cosplay. That's a curious title that had me wondering in expectation of what kind of tune this would be. There's a 16-measure intro setting the modal mood with ominous bass and left-hand piano lines. The undulating melody lines trace the sometimes unexpected harmonic changes in a repeated 16-measure section, and then a final 16 measures of more syncopated ideas. Let's check it out. After that next section, 8 more measures of the opening idea set up Roberts' improvisations. Once he gets going, there's a nice switch up by Penman from snappy figures to walking bass that's really cool. And Davis gets to do some tight drum work over a vamp on the ostinato, so let's check out some of his stuff on this tune. And there's the start of the final melody section, which surprises you, ending suddenly after just 24 measures. Track 6, another Roberts original, Amaryllis. This has a swinging 6/8 meter with a neat stop and start feel on the 8-measure intro. The wistful melody is 30 measures with an interesting 6-measure section. Let's hear it get started. Roberts' improvised lines have a smooth, skating quality in this one, with clear articulation and ringing chords. Let's hear another solo from Penman on this tune. And the recording is going to end up with Cole Porter's You Do Something to Me from the 1929 musical 50 Million Frenchmen.
I'm just trying to imagine coming home from work and saying, "Hey, honey, I've got tickets for 50 million Frenchmen tonight. We're going out."
Anyway, it made me curious. Are there really 50 million Frenchmen? And the answer is no. The population of France exceeded 50 million in 1969. And currently it's at 65 million. But assuming half of that's female. there still are not 50 million Frenchmen. Just thought you'd like to know. Anyway, you do something to me, and they've done something to this tune rhythmically to make it a lot of fun, starting out on the 16-measure intro. When the melody starts in the piano, check out Davis's cymbal and tight snare fills, and then check out the final bass and left-hand piano line section they give it, working into the piano solo. Swinging, and Roberts has some exciting melodic lines in his solo. Let's come back in and check out a little bit more of that later on. Penman has an enthusiastic bass solo too. After another time around the melody, they vamp on the bass and piano ostinato for some final drum fun from Davis. Just one rehearsal and a gig in preparation for this recording. Considering that, the tightness and the synergy is outstanding in this trio. Also, everything sounds fresh, bursting with energy, even giving new rhythmic twists to the two standards that are a lot of fun. Roberts' original tunes are varied and interesting, with complex harmonies that match his sense of rich chord voicings. He has a really classy touch with lines that are smooth yet clearly articulated, and a wealth of melodic ideas in his improvisations. Penman's bass is solid underneath with a lot of variety of rhythmic figures, and his solos are melodic and have a reaching quality to the lines. And Davis has a lot of spots to shine too, not just in hard-hitting ways, but with intricate snare work and fine cymbal touches throughout. You'll be entertained and challenged, especially with the rich harmonies in the tunes that will make you want to listen again and again.
Yeah, these guys sound really eager, so they have that energy that really draws you in, to want to hear this record. It put me in a good place. It's mostly laid-back tempos for the most part, at least not until the last track anyway. All of it is sensitive and on the lighter side of the emotions. The solos are all sensitively taken on piano and bass, each note played for maximum effect. I found myself really being drawn in, by the tone and the presence of the sound. There's a lot of thoughtfulness in the playing of all three members of the trio, and I especially like the slow, late-night feel of My Ship and the gorgeous harmonies and flow in Amaryllis. Of course, you would think that of me, right? It's an enjoyable album of straightforward jazz with some classy playing, good vibrations, and some pretty intriguing harmonies, too.
Yeah, nice stuff. All right, our second recording, bassist Giuseppe Campisi. On the Fresh Sound New Talent label, his recording is Somewhere. It came out September 28th. Campisi, bassist, composer, and arranger, grew up in Sicily. where he developed a passion for music from a young age. Now he makes his home in Barcelona. He earned a degree in jazz composition at Berklee College of Music, as well as a master's in jazz performance at the Conservatorium van Amsterdam. He's performed and recorded in Europe and the United States with people like George Garzone, Dick Oates, Ben Van Gelder, Andrea Motis, Jasper Blum, Michael Moore, and many others. The notes to the recording say this album seeks to balance tradition and modernity. On the recording, Giuseppe Campisi on bass, Marcel Peramon on tenor sax, Camille Arcorazzo on guitar, Jorge Rossi, a well-known figure on the Spanish jazz scene, on drums, and we've got a guest on piano on 3 tracks, Sunil Lopez. This was recorded at Sol de Sant Estudi, Barcelona, on September 6th and 7th, 2023. We're going to start out with the title track, Leonard Bernstein's Somewhere from West Side Story. Everyone knows this tune, so we're going to get going in familiar territory. It's originally a 4/4 tune, but here it's in 6/8, which seems natural with the triplet figures from the original melody. I like the sparseness of the unison sax and guitar melody over Campisi's bass and Rossi's soft drums. Let's check it out. Arcorazzo solos first on this tune, and his lines are double-stopped and chordal most of the way. It's kind of interesting. Let's take a listen. That sounds really relaxed and great. Peramon follows with a gentle airy improvisation before a final chilled melody ending section. Track 2 is an original from Arcorazzo, Magical Summer, a sunny Brazilian-feeling tune. The intro sounds like 6 measures of 6 beats before it settles into a 4/4 bossa nova feel with an airy 30-measure sax and guitar melody. Let's have a listen. Orchestral is up for a solo first with fluid and fast lines this time. Let's check out Campise's bass solo on this tune. Nice bubbly lines in his solo, and back to the melody with a soft ending vamp to wrap it up. Track 3, a Campisi original, First Thought. This is a cool minor tune. The intro has syncopated guitar chords setting the mood. Paramon takes the melody on sax. It's long, seems to be 46 measures. We can hear the first part of it anyway. Continues on for a solo after the melody that swings really nicely, so let's hear some of his improvising on this tune. There. Orchestral gets a guitar solo on this tune as well. Track 4, Prisoner of Love, a tune by Leo Robin, Clarence Gaskill, and Russ Colombo, first performed by Colombo in 1931. This gets a relaxed treatment with airy but full-tone sax from Paramon and a solo from Orchestral. I'll leave you to check that one out on your own. We'll go on to track 5, a Campisi original, Deep Down Raval. A change in mood for this one. Sunil Lopez joins in on piano. Campisi has a busy walking bass going as Lopez peppers in staccato chords. The melody lines are jagged sax and guitar interjections that surprise with each entrance. There's a break for Paramon's solo that shifts up the rhythmic field to a more settled walk. Let's hear the tune up to that point. goes off on a new rhythmic feel, and the rhythm will constantly evolve as it goes along. Orchestral has an adventurous solo too, and since Lopez is the guest here, let's hear some of his piano playing on this track. Solo has a kind of monkish playfulness to it, and Paramon and Orchestral are back with some final jagged melody lines to wrap things up. Track 6 is a Campisi original, What a New Day Could Bring. It's a relaxing ballad. Paramon gets the 24-measure melody with tasty chords from Orchestral underneath. We can hear most of the tune in a minute. And also, let's check out Campisi's bass solo on this one. He's really reaching up high there. Orchestral has a fine guitar solo on this one as well before Paramon returns with a final melody section. Track 7, Miles Davis's Sippin' at Bells. This was recorded by the Miles Davis All-Stars back in 1947. A drum-fill start, and then it's bebop time with this 12-bar blues melody taken in unison by sax and guitar. Let's hear it go around a couple times into the start of Orchestral's solo. and Campisi get solos too, and then Rossi gets to trade a few choruses on the drums later on in the tune. So let's hear some of his playing as well. Times around the blues melody, wrap it up. Track 8, I Surrender, Dear, a Harry Barris tune, first recorded by Gus Arnheim and his Coconut Grove Orchestra in 1931 with a vocal refrain by Bing Crosby. Lopez is back on piano for this one. It's a 32-measure AABA melody at a very loping pace, and it's too slow to get the whole melody in a sample. So on this one, let's check out the start of Lopez's piano solo that has some really fun tremolos in it. Playing there. Arcorazzo and Paramon get solo spots on this tune as well. Track 9, Pure Imagination, from the 1971 movie Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, tuned by Anthony Newley and Leslie Bricusse. We should hear this tune more often. It's another tune originally done in 4/4 that sounds light and nimble in 6/8 here. Paramon gets the melody lines that include an anticipation-raising pause that they also keep in effect for the solos. Let's hear it get started. Lopez is still in on this tune and gets the first solo on piano. Let's hear Paramon's sax solo on this one. That little pause in there and hesitation is a nice touch. Orchestral gets a solo with fine melodic ideas on this tune as well. And the recording is going to end up with Burt Bacharach's Alfie, 1966, Michael Caine and Shelley Winter's movie. The song was originally sung by Celia Black in the same year. Orchestral's intro is really nice on this one. Let's check out his great guitar tone. There's Paramount coming in with the famous melody. Let's hear a little bit more of Orchestral's playing on this tune before we finish things up. And that's the recording. It's mostly straight ahead and all tastefully played. Campisi has made a good program. The instrumentation goes from a pleasant sparseness on the opening somewhere and fills out on the three tunes with Lopez's piano. Campisi's originals are attractive with some Latin, a ballad, and the edgier deep down reval. The soloing swings and sounds confident and relaxed from Paramount, Orchestral, and Campisi himself. Lopez has a couple of solo spots that excite, and Rossi mostly keeps things really tight, but gets a few rounds on sippinette bells, and he delivers a lot of nice brushwork on the softer numbers. This recording will just put a smile on your face.
Yeah, I got that late night at the jazz club after a few drinks, feeling pretty good, but kind of mellow. It's pleasant all the way through, and it softly went by with beautiful light tone all around. I especially liked Marcel Paramount's breathy tone on the sax. I'm really a big fan of the breathy tone.
Yeah, it's nice.
I have to say. Yeah. Campisi himself has a big, deep tone, and I liked hearing him step out. Camille Orchestral was a major player on the album and provided tonal contrast with Paramount playing with full, clean tone for the most part. And Sunil Lopez showed he's a bit of a chameleon on this album. He took a different approach in the three tracks he's on. Each one, he was almost like a different pianist. Meanwhile, Jorge Rossi kept the drumming light and pleasant throughout. He's got a light touch on this album anyway. It's a good album to unwind to. With the exception of Deep Down Reval, which throws in a bit of spice, this album is on the soft, relaxing side, and it's a really good late-night listen.
Yeah, easy to enjoy. All right, the final recording is going to be a little bit more challenging for your ears, but it's really interesting. Walschaturm on Unit Records from trumpeter Matthias Spielmann and his trio. Came out September 26th. Born in 1975, Matthias Spielmann grew up near Zurich, Switzerland, on his parents' farm and started out playing trumpet in the local wind band. He studied at the Swiss Jazz School in Bern with Bert Joris. and then spent an extended period in New York studying at the New School for Social Research. He took composition lessons with Ed Neumeister. He's performed with Franco Ambrosetti, Bob Berg, Malcolm Braff, Randy Brecker, Gary Burton, Pablo Held, many others, and he teaches at the Lucerne University of Applied Sciences and Arts. On this recording, Matthias Spillmann on trumpet and flugelhorn, Moritz Baumgartner on drums, Andreas Long on bass, special guest American Bill McHenry on tenor sax on 4 tracks, and we're going chordless on this one. As you can see, no piano or guitar, so I was intrigued at that. It was recorded on April 24th, 2022. That's tracks 3, 4, 6, and 8. And May 12th, 2023, tracks 1, 2, 5, and 7. So kind of split into 2 different sessions. Recording and mixing engineer Philip Schaufelberger. Mastering engineer Alex Huber. Producer Matthias Spillmann. Executive producer Andreas Wielty and Luca Cicera. The recording is going to start out with the Charles Mingus tune, Reincarnation of a Lovebird, from Mingus's 1957 The Clown. Lang's bass sounds great getting this tune going, and Spillmann comes in on the playful melody with Baumgartner mixing things up on the drums underneath. Let's hear this recording get started. Let's hear some of Spillmann's improvisations on this tune a little bit further on. Even with the extra freedom, he's connecting the harmonic dots really nicely, and it's fun to follow both his lines and the bass notes. Lang gets a real spring-loaded bass solo over tight snare work from Baumgartner before they get back to the melody. Track 2, Volscherturm 1, and it's labeled as a free improvisation. Mysterious soft trumpet tones and scratchy textures on the drums turn to more fuller tones and ringing bass. It's going to be hard to capture this in a sample. Let's jump in about a minute in to have a listen once things get going. The melding on the phrasing between Spillman and Lang is interesting. It gets a little bit more drive to it as it moves along, but keeps the longing nature with a melodic direction. Very nice for a spontaneous ballad. Track 3 will be joined by Bill McHenry and his original tune, Apretada. Baumgartner has a Latiny beat going under the riffy sax melody. As the harmonies change, Spillman has ever-rising long notes before joining in on the riff. It's pretty cool. Let's take a listen. Spillman's getting going on his improvisations there, and he has really good direction to his lines. The horns join in on the riff again to get McHenry started on his solo, so let's check out some of his playing on this tune. Works it into some interesting figures with overtones, gradually cranking up the energy, and then Spillman is back to rejoin him on the melody. Track 4 is Thelonious Monk's Locomotive from the 1954 Blue Monk Volume 2 recording. McHenry gets the intervals of the melody started, and Spillman joins in. Baumgartner has a great steam engine loping beat going on. It's infectious and fun. Stop it right there on the hold because I want you to hear the great lyrical lines that Spillman starts his solo out with right after the melody. Lang is off on a ringing solo from there on the bass. He really has a strong attack on notes. Baumgartner has interesting fills and textures underneath, and McHenry has a solo with some fun phrasing in it too before they take it through the melody again. Track 5 is Lindsbaum. This is composed by Charlotte Spillman and arranged by Matthias Spillman. Just the trio here again. This starts out with a searching quality to the trumpet lines and a little playful syncopation and swing, but then turns darker with descending lines. Spillman gradually retreats, leaving Lang ringing out notes, and he suddenly picks up steam and gets a rhythm chugging along. Let's hear that happen. Spillman's up next for some improvising that connects back to the melody phrases for an ending with the descending line. Track 6 is a Spillman original Moon. Ringing double bass stops make a hypnotic mood for legato horn lines with pitch wavers. It's like a desert dirge and very interesting. The horn lines repeat with more intensity and then soften. They work into a new section with more active bass underneath. And let's hear McHenry's improvisations on this tune. It's an interesting, eerie kind of atmosphere. Spillman's solo here has a great sense of anguish with choked cries and touches of bluesy ideas, and the horns are back with the somber melody lines to finish it. I really liked this tune a lot. Track 7 is Walscherturm 2, another free improvisation. Spillman plays half-valved cries over bass and drums. I'll sample from a little bit before 2 minutes in where things get busy and Spillman has found an interesting melodic trajectory. Some spitty harmonics there before some longer tones. After leaving the bass and drums to carry on for a while, Spillman finds a new lyrical melody idea that works into trilly things to finish up with a cute ending. Let's check that out. And the recording's going to end up with Bobby Troupe's The Meaning of the Blues from 1957, first performed by Julie London with Russ Garcia and his orchestra. The horn harmonies are very fine on this slow and lyrical treatment of the melody. Sounds like he's on flugelhorn here. Let's hear things get going. After the melody, McHenry has a lovely restrained solo, and Spillman follows with a lyrical solo too. Let's hear one more from him get started on the last tune. takes it up to some high register lines for a climax before a soft ending. And Lang gets a super relaxed bass solo spot too before the horns are back with the melody. This is the most enjoyable chordless recording I've heard in a while. The tune selection is great, with Monk and Mingus, Bobby Troop's The Meaning of the Blues, and original tunes from Spillman and McHenry. I especially enjoyed Spillman's haunting Moon. Lang's bass note choices always give you enough outline of the harmonies, and he has a huge ringing tone. Spillman's melodic sense creates more than enough direction, whether on the melodies or in his improvisations. Even the two free improvisations are interesting and arrive somewhere purposefully. Spillman's tone is big and warm, and his playing sounds confident. McHenry's solos cover a range of emotions with nice development, and Baumgartner fills in the gaps with interesting ideas and textures along the way. Life without piano and guitar can be great as well, like this recording.
Yeah, I like this too. It's a great sounding recording, really crisp, with a high level of detail in the drums.
Yes.
You could hear the hi-hat and the cymbal like really clearly, like it's in the room with you. The music making is very spacious, probably due to the lack of a chord instrument. As a result, we have almost an outline of rhythm, even of swing rhythm, which occurs the most often. Sometimes the rhythm doesn't stick around for long, detouring into something else, and I'm used to this from classical music, so I was kind of interested to hear it here. The album starts out rather upbeat, with ever-changing swinging ideas, and becomes more and more of a downer on the last three tracks, which become dissonant and downhearted. The Meaning of the Blues gets a slow, smoky room treatment, and playing is appealing and creative throughout. This is something rather different, though rooted in tradition, and should provide an appealing challenge to listeners. But it's a good challenge, and I really liked it. Yeah, I like chordless jazz too. This was an interesting one. I remember the Nicole Glover one from earlier in the year. Different than this, though. This one had more of a kind of went in and out of traditional, I thought. It was interesting.
It's kind of in vogue lately, although it's nothing new, going all the way back to Sonny Rollins, and there was a lot of cool jazz. I love to hear Chet Baker and Art Pepper play with no chordal instrument, because they had this real counterpoint and interweaving lines going that was great.
Right.
And so, recently we're getting some recordings. This one was really interesting in the approach and all the general space you had here too. But I think it's always good. Once in a while, I like to hear a recording like we'll just hear piano and bass with no drums. So take those cymbals out too. Your ears are focused on different things to listen to, and you don't have that rhythm outlined for you. So it's always an interesting and challenging listen to hear things in a new way. But yeah, this recording I found really satisfying.
Yeah, timbre as meaning. It's kind of a great concept for music. I like it.
Well, that's going to wrap up episode 184 of Adult Music. Thanks, as always, to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo. And we've got a menu already planned for episode 185. What's on the classical side of the program, Mike?
Well, next week I'm revisiting a lot of artists that we've already featured on the program, and a composer, too. First, we have music by Domenico Scarlatti, and I'm never like to be without a Scarlatti recording on my portable player. And this particular one is by a harpsichordist we heard last year, Francesco Corti. We heard him playing Italian harpsichord. Well, this is Italian harpsichord music too. But it's pretty interesting. He's taken these sonatas, they're one movement works, but he's grouped them into twos, and there's an argument that says they might actually go together. So it's a pretty compelling program, and he's a great player, so I'm interested to hear that. Also, last year, my recording of the year was Monteverdi's Vespers by Pygmalion and Raphael Pichon. And this year, he's put out Mozart's Requiem.
Wow.
And between that Monteverdi and before that, he did a St. Matthew Passion by Bach, and they're both like benchmark or very kind of top-ranked recordings, and I'm just really curious to hear this. I've never really been a big fan of the Mozart Requiem because it's an incomplete piece, and I kind of thought, it's not really Mozart, but he's making a good case for this, and I want to hear what that sounds like. It's kind of an interesting program. And then a composer that we've featured before, Peteris Vasks, Latvian composer. This is his second violin concerto in Evening Light, and his first violin concerto is his most famous piece. So I want to hear how he followed that up. He's got another title about light, so I'm guessing it's going to be kind of similar.
All sounds interesting. On the jazz side, we're going to have all new faces here, musicians we haven't heard before on the podcast. starting out in Italy with guitarist Luca Gelli on the Dodici Lune label. He's doing Wayne Shorter tunes on a recording called Shorter Notes, but with an ensemble that includes hammered organ. So I'm really interested to hear what that's going to sound like.
There you go. I'm in.
We've got a trumpeter from New Zealand who's active on the Canadian jazz scene, Lex French, who I haven't heard before, In the World's First Summer. That's on Network Music, Just in Time Records, so I'm looking forward to that as well. And French drummer Olivier Robin with Take It Like It Is, a quintet recording on the Fresh Sound New Talent label. So all fresh stuff for us. Should be interesting. If you want to check out those recordings early, listen to them as we do during the week, there'll be a playlist up on Deezer for this episode with all the recordings in one place. That'll be up a few hours after this episode is published. You can also find a link to it from our Facebook page. Any final comments, Mike?
This week, let's all try to reach that divine level of harmonic as heard in Sofia Gubaidulina's piece, Rejoice. There you go.
All right.
That's my last thought.
Try to get my personal resonance working. We'll see what happens. Anyway, we'll be back again next week with episode 185. So until then, keep listening, and we'll see you again next time.